chapter 1.3, part 2. So we talked about value and chiaroscuro, and then briefly crossing and hatching and cross-hatching is another way. It's not as soft. If you look back at Caravaggio, you see the softness and the blending here. There's also a way to use line to create a sense of value. So the idea of frequency, the closeness together, and then the multiple crossing over. So one set of lines would create one value, and you see how this looks darker here and even darker with the cast shadow. So that can be done with lines. Our example very quickly is Michelangelo piece, Head of a Satyr. And this is pen and ink, and this can be done this way, but by goodness, it's quite hard. But if you look at a dollar bill, you'll see a lot of this cross-hatching stuff happening. See how there's nothing right there? Then that is where the light is shining on that highlight. So no lines there, and then areas where there's only like one set of lines right here, and then multiple gets denser and denser, crossing in different directions. Okay, so in our shadow areas in this cheekbone here, or this chin bone, then you have more shadow. All right, space is going to be our next topic here, and this is a little tricky, and I feel like students really struggle with this. And I'll probably do this in two parts. Let's see how efficient I can be. So value is one way, but size and overlapping and position is another way. There's also alternating value and texture, which is actually atmospheric perspective is another expression for this. And then changing the brightness and color, similar. These are both similar in atmospheric perspective. But overlapping and position, these are early ways that we use space in a painting. But again, it's implied space. It's not real space. So the size or shape of something compared to another, like things that are closer to us are larger. Even though in our mind, when we're looking out in the world, if we see a tree in the distance, we're not thinking, oh my gosh, what a small tree. That's not how it works. But in painting, it is going to show you something smaller. Let's go here. Well, I guess that's the best that we're going to get for this. But this is supposedly the same ball, but it's going to be further back, being smaller. That's how we perceive things. So the illusion of depth in two dimensions often influenced by the arrangement and value of the texture, because we see things more clearly that are close up to us. Things get less clear in the distance, and that literally atmospheric perspective really does mean atmosphere. It's usually 90% of the time used in landscapes, but we also use that even when we're painting and drawing indoors, because it's a device, if that makes sense. There's not really enough atmosphere unless you're in an old-fashioned smoky bar to make things blurry within a room. But in our mind, the way it works and the way a painter knows the mind works, if that makes sense, they're going to make things blurry in the distance, even if it's in an interior space. But it's usually used most times in landscape painting and drawing. So this is a Chinese example. A little tougher with the non-Western examples just because they have different rules for the way they make things, and I'll talk about that in a minute with isometric perspective. But anyway, you can see the details of these trees and the things in the foreground. If you see this rock edge right here, and this is kind of nice too because it's overlapping the river so that we know that the rocks are closer to us than the river. But also, if you see this fogginess that's around here, now that might literally be steam coming out from a water source, but we want to think about it in terms of atmospheric perspective as these detailed tree tops are here, and as we go further out, you can't really see that, but I'm sure it's quite the same geography, quite the same line quality that it would have if we were close to it. So the further away things are, the blurrier they get, the more detailed or more textured they get in the foreground, and in terms of color, the depth of color is stronger closer to us. Oh yes, that has layers. I beg your pardon. This is also layers. I should have gone a little further with that. With these rocks, that's on top of the river. the river's in front of this mountain or this little ridge is in front of this other sort of body of water or canyon, and then it's got overlapping to give a sense of depth. That is a traditional Chinese way of painting. So lighter areas are closer as dark areas recede. Now that's not 100%, but yes, for the most part. And then an intense green will appear closer to us than a darker green. So we have this particular piece. If we're looking over here at this brighter colored piece here, then we have some darker greens in the background. This is probably the best part of this painting to illustrate what the author is talking about and what atmospheric perspective looks like. We all have, or even if we live in the desert, which I do, and it's sort of interesting because this is less the case because you can see long distances quite clearly. It's kind of strange. But anyway, moisture, in the air makes things blurry at a distance. So if you see this here, looks a bit smoggy, which likely it is not. But it is very blurry and soft, if that makes sense, because it's further away. There's a hill there, but we can barely see it, if that makes sense. And those are green hills, perhaps, but we can't see that color. Then up here we have bright green, very close. This is not the best example for this particular concept. I think we have a better one coming up. I'm going to skip to this guy. So as you see here, these guys are in these crisp, detailed areas, lots of plants and things like that, dark and crisp. As you go further back, things are kind of blurry and faded in light, because literally cloud moisture is blurring our vision. Usually it's a bluish tint. You can see that a little bit here, but some paintings more than others, you really see that bluish tint in the distance. And if you ever take a photograph, you're standing on a mountain, you're looking at multiple mountain ranges in the distance, you will see how blue your photograph is in the distance. Okay, now we're going to back up just a little bit. This is a really good example in an illustration. So see how crisp and clear. So this has the largeness of the object closer to us. That has that principle. And then it also has overlapping. My mouse is struggling today.